Today we're going to talk about 5 reasons why every disciple needs to obey the Great Commission. Let's start in Matthew chapter 28, verse 16. But the 11 disciples proceeded to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had designated. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some were doubtful. And Jesus came up and spoke to them, saying, All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. This is known as Jesus' Great Commission. Now let's talk about the first 3 reasons why every disciple needs to obey the Great Commission. The first is geographical. In Matthew 28:19, it says, Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations. Well, how many of the 11 disciples made it to all the nations? Well, we know that some made it as far as India, but not all the nations. So geographically, it's important for us to realize that this command was given not only to the 11, but all disciples until all the nations were reached. The next reason is the chronological reason. If we look at verse 20, Jesus says, And lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. How many of the 11 made it to the end of the age? When he says, I'll be with you, he's talking to all of us. Throughout the ages, the Great Commission would be passed on from generation to generation until the end comes. And Jesus would be with us, empowering us, and helping us fulfill his Great Commission. The third reason is the logical reason. If we look at verse 20, Jesus says to teach them to observe all that I've commanded you. If Jesus commanded his disciples to teach people to obey all of his commands, it would stand to reason that the last command would be taught as well. And so as one generation of disciples teaches the next to obey the Great Commission to make disciples of all the nations, it's a logical assumption that we all need to obey all the commands, including the Great Commission. So, that's 3. Let's move on to the last 2. The first thing we need to do is look at the Great Commandments, and that will give us 2 more reasons to obey the Great Commission. In Mark chapter 12, verses 30 and 31, it says, And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this, You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So, we are commanded in the Great Commandment to love God and love people. It's interesting how Jesus defines loving God. We can find this throughout the scriptures, but I like John 14:21. It says, He who has my commandments and keeps them is the one who loved me, and he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and will disclose myself to him. Do you want to love God? Do you want to obey the Great Commandment? The way to do that is by obeying him. And obeying the Great Commission is part of obeying His commands. And the second is like the first, love people. I like 1 John 4:20. If someone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. Interesting, the connection between loving people and making disciples. If I love someone, I would certainly not withhold good news from them. And then loving people. I can't think of a more loving act than to share the gospel and help somebody follow Jesus. If I had the cure to cancer and I withheld that from you for whatever reason, and you were dying, and you found out that I had the cure and could have given it to you, you would probably put that act on the same level as hate. But on the other hand, if I gave you the cure and saved your life, then that would be the most loving thing I could ever do for you. We have the cure to a spiritual cancer, and we must share the gospel and help people become like Christ in order to love them and love God by obeying His Great Commission. There are 7.6 billion people on the planet right now, and apparently 2.2 are believers, disciples, followers of Jesus. I think that might be debatable. Let's say half, 1.1 billion followers of Jesus. If every disciple of Jesus just made one disciple a year, it would take us a little less than 6 years to reach every single person on the planet with the gospel and the opportunity to follow and become like Jesus. That would be no place left in 6 years. That would mean every man, woman, and child on the planet had heard the good news and had the opportunity to follow Christ. These are the 5 reasons why I think every disciple should be obeying the Great Commission.